So we're going to talk taxes today, which nobody really likes the subject.
No.
But what was it, that statement, two things are certain in life, taxes and death, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah. So what about the La Renta, which is being dealt with at the moment then?
Right. Okay. This is important message for people that are spending more than 183 days in Spain, right? So if those was living now in Spain and they spent in 2023, right? So we always look behind, yeah, and a
year back,
yeah. They spend more than 6 months. That means that they are supposed to lodge their income tax return. Now, people get confused here, Carl, about having the residency permit and tax certificates, right? I mean, you might get a TIE card and not necessarily be tax resident, right? But the bottom line, to keep it very simple, if you spend more than 6 months in Spain, you will be liable to declare it here. There is a dual taxation treaty. Well, there are many dual taxation treaty with countries. I mean,
so for Britain, for instance, has a dual taxation. Yes. What about and if you're if you're in the EU, of course, you're fine.
Yes,
any countries that are part of the EU.
There are many. There are different dual taxation treaties between Spain and we've got with France.
Even within the EU.
Yes, yes,
okay.
Because the tax is not something unified by Europe. You see, so every country is different, and we have certain allowance, certain agreements. The bottom line, they are very similar, I will say. The structure of the treaties are very similar, or they look like pretty good, all of them, similar, but they're not the same. And we've got one with the United States, one with the UK, all around the world, all around the world. So depending on nationality of the person who's lodging their income tax, they need to tell their accountant, the nationality. And always bear in mind the dual taxation treaty between Spain and whatever country he or she belongs to.
Okay. I see. So take us through it. If you now think, I'm eligible, what do you have to do?
Right. Now, let's say we did comply with the first rule, unless there is different conflicts, which the dual taxation treaty really, just in case people spend pretty much the same amount of money, what is the center of interest?
Right.
Because some people might have two properties, one here, one there, be six months and 6 months, or pretty much like,
I see what you're saying.
And there are rules that identify where you should lodge your income tax return. Now, for you to know clearly, if you spend more than 183 days, then now is the time from the 1st of January, let's say this year is 2023, we're talking about 2023, looking at 1st of January to the 31st of December. Therefore, you will need to disclose, it's a self-assessment, okay, and you'll need to disclose how much income you have. I mean, do I have a state pension? Do I have a civil service pension? Do I have a private pension? Do I have an IRA, if you're an American? Do I have a Roth IRA? Do I have a Social Security pension? So,
wow.
Yeah. So all this information needs to be disclosed, right? As I said, depending on the country where you're coming from, we've got different rules to take it into consideration. Now, do I have property income, even though it's abroad? Okay, I need you to disclose all the income and all the expenses on that investment that you made. The purchase value, which is a rule, okay, like catastrophe value or purchase value. And we need to get a net figure of every single property. Well, the good thing here, Carl, is only this good, that if you're renting long-term property, from the 40% of the net is taxable. The 60% is tax-free. That's very good for people to make decisions, because a lot of them come over here and they just ask for, do me a simulation, do what is best before you even commit yourself.
To make the decision about, is it better for them to rent or to buy?
Correct. That's a lot of common questions. So that if you're renting through these platforms, the online platforms like you have through Airbnb or Booking or whatever of this, that is not exempt. I mean, that you don't have an allowance. So the figure you need to work on is income minus expenses, and the net is taxable 100%, so there is not any reduction. Then if you have, what else could you have there? We talk about work, we talk about income from property, dividends and interest from banks. even though you got interest abroad, you need to declare it here. Now, dual taxation treaty applies as well. There are rules that they could tax you, like property.
Certain allowances for certain different types of income.
The good thing is that tax that you paid abroad is deductible here. So that's good as well. So you don't pay double if it's been paid already. And what else we could consider as an income? Well, I know people, for example, today I have a few that they have olive trees here and they go to the cooperative and then just sell the olives.
Okay.
Or they're self-employed and they work as self-employed and then all the invoice.
Economic activity.
Economic activity, exactly it. All this needs to be disclosed. Then we need your birthday, so the date you were born, to work out the allowance, whether you're married or not, to be able to do it joint income tax, to get her allowance towards you or him to you, children as well, and different bits and pieces. When you do some donations as well, some little.
I guess if you have a big change as well, like you sell a property or something like that, perhaps that's also part of it.
Yes, you've got a
sale
good
of
one.
assets.
Yeah. That's a good one, and that's something important. I always ask clients if they've sold the property.
And stocks and shares, perhaps.
Stocks and shares, exactly it. Because if you sell the shares, I need to disclose purchase value, selling value. If you sold the property, if you're over 65, on your main property, as long as you stay there more than 3 years, it's tax-free.
Wow, okay.
That's very good. Now, if you're below, or is your second property, you're going to pay taxes from the net. The tax rate is different. We've got it in our website, the sliding scale. If they go what we do, taxes, la renta or income tax return, they will see the sliding scale that goes from, I believe, 15% up to 48%. Okay, every marginal has got a percentage. So from this amount to that, I tell clients.
Do they change year to year? Sorry, Ignacio, the actual percentage that you might have to pay.
It's not very often to change, but it's being updated, Carl. It's being for the investments. They did unfortunately change it because we used to have 19, 21 and 23.
Right, yes.
But these people said it was not enough and they said 26, 28. So now you've got, again, sliding scale.
So what you might have done before could be a little bit different this year.
Yes.
2023.
Yeah, every year something varies, so something is different, right? I normally say to clients, if you plan ahead, there is a way to control your taxes, and that's a good thing of it. If you know the thresholds, if you know the allowances, for example, if you only have in pensions and you don't reach 15,000 euros,
you're okay.
You're okay, right? But again, not paying tax doesn't mean you're not obliged to lodge your income tax return.
You still have to
lodge it, even though it's zero sometimes. Okay, for example, if you manage to get dividends, few interest, that really makes you eligible or obliged you to lodge your income tax return. The period to lodge it goes from April to the end of June. Okay, so we're still on time.
Yep.
And then we will need their bank account details, so it could be direct debit, the payment in case of payment, or a rebate. A lot of people don't know they're being taxed here, and especially if you're working, you're being taxed probably some money, and sometimes when you work it out at the end of the year,
you get a refund.
You get a refund of a lot of money. Why? Because it depends on personal circumstances. People get surprised about that, but this happens,
Does it take a long time for the rebate to come through, perhaps?
Not necessarily. In the old days, yes, it used to take more time. But now I think they're very straightforward. Unless you have an awkward situation or difficult things or paperwork they need to see. For example, you sold a property. You're making a loss. They won't like making a loss. You're claiming money back from all the taxes. They're going to ask you to prove. Where is that paperwork? That's why I always recommend clients to keep them up to 4 years, all their paperwork.
I see, four years, a 4 year backlog.
They could look at, or they could request it to you. Now, important advice as well, Carl. They need to make sure their address on their income tax return is accurate and they get the post. Otherwise, my recommendation is to appoint the lawyer as an address, because I see so many stories which I see because they come from different places. They never notify.
Well, a lot of the time, mail doesn't get delivered, especially if you're living in a large apartment complex.
Inland.
Sometimes, I mean, certainly in mine, I just found my car tax because it happened to be somebody had put it on the side.
Yes.
They don't actually end up going through the door at all. So,
right. And that could be quite scary sometimes, because sometimes, and it didn't even happen to me, which they know my address, but these people, and I get very upset with them because they freeze your account.
Right.
So they try to deliver a letter that you probably don't know.
You don't get.
Or you don't get. Mm-hmm. Then after twice, they just enforce the resolution,
mm-hmm.
and they send you another letter, but the money is taken automatically. We're handling a lot of cases, unfortunately. So
they have to do it retro. Look at what's happened and why. And that also costs.
And it costs. Yeah. Important advice, Carl. The address is very important. A self-assessment, so people need to disclose their own information. They could download the tax details from the tax office with their digital certificate, or we could do it for them,
mm-hmm.
and they will have their information. Doesn't mean that is the truth, because sometimes tax office will know where you work, but probably you're doing some business for somebody else in the UK or abroad, and
so they won't have all.
They
the
won't have that,
mm-hmm.
and that's for you to do it and disclose that information.
If somebody has realised they actually probably should be declaring this, what's the best way to go about it?
Well, I don't expect clients knowing how to do it themselves. Okay, I mean they've got one option. They could even go to the tax office, apply for an appointment, and try to discuss it with the clerk.
Can you do it online, possibly?
I don't. Well, you could do it with your digital certificate and try to do the borrador, right to the draft.
Mm-hmm.
I do not recommend that unless it's very, very straightforward.
Yeah,
and you are very, very clear, because dealing with the tax office is always a kind of worm.
Of course, anywhere.
And then you doing your draft, if it's very straightforward, okay, I will accept it, But even if you have international elements,
mm-hmm.
even the clerk will not know, because and you still have telephone assistance if you need, but they are not that specialist. They are more like trying to put details in place.
Perhaps more used to dealing with your average Spaniard with their current situation, with perhaps one job and so on. So
probably.
So we need to be talking to a gestor or international lawyers like yourselves.
Yeah. When you speak to a gestor, just make sure they understand the international situation, because sometimes some gestor might do basic stuff, and some of them might have better knowledge, but not necessarily.
It's a bit wide-ranging, isn't it? Because the direct translation would be accountant, I suppose,
but not really.
In British.
Yeah.
But they're multifaceted in Spain, aren't they?
Yes. The gestor is somebody. Technically, the word will be dealing. Gestión is deal.
A dealer.
Dealer, yeah.
Sounds
which, to be honest, the original gestor just pass paperwork.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to advise, doesn't need to think. It's just passing on paperwork, and I do on your behalf whatever I need to do. But doesn't take that much responsibility,
mm-hmm.
The gestor. Now, lawyers or accountants are more advisors, and that's why it's better advised specifically on these kind of income tax returns.
I would say, especially in international sense as well. If you're from a different country living in or working in Spain.
Yeah. And but as I said, some gestor might be okay, but I sometimes get the feeling from clients they went to a gestor and lost in communication.
You're being very generous, because my experience and other people's isn't actually that great.
I'm being generous. Yeah. Sometimes I prefer to be generous. Yeah. But yes, and unfortunately, Carl, that's why I'm trying to insist when we're talking about taxes, it's important, because sometimes they could say, "Oh, don't worry about this." Well, you do worry. Mm. I mean, not necessarily trust you don't worry about this, easily. I could tell you a lot of stories, even when they just told them not to worry about a labor issue, and it became a big labor issue. Even freezing your account, even a lot of things.
Okay.
I prefer dealing from the very beginning rather than you when you have a problem after the gestor.
Well, again, because that's just going to endure more costs for the client.
Correct.
If they have to do that.
Yes.
So,
yes. So my specific advice will be go to people who knows, and now how do you know? Well, then just as you know, you could go to websites, learn a little bit more, and do your shopping.
Yeah. I was about to point out really, because there's quite straightforward and laid out quite well on the Pellicer and Heredia website, which you can find by just googling Alicante lawyers, of course, and in not just in English, but in Spanish, in Dutch, in French, and also in Russian. And the basics for all of these sorts of things are all there, aren't they? In the different languages. So it's a lot more straightforward when you can see it laid out in front of you.
That's why I recommend clients just going to a website. Our website I consider it to be pretty good because it's like your garden. You're watering every day. You're updating your content, So, and this is for clients and for people to take it away and learn. And if they need help, they could come, I try to update La Renta article is being updated. Okay. So it's pretty much updated and no issues with that.
You'll find that on the tax and fiscal services part of the Alicante Lawyers website. Just one more thing on that address. There's nothing wrong with using your gestor or your lawyer as an address. It just means that actually the information will get to you. As we mentioned in the past, post doesn't always reach you in Spain.
Yeah. You mean by post, you mean? Or,
using your gestor or your lawyer, as you mentioned, as the actual address for your tax returns.
Correct. I try to be very picky on the postal address and buzon or PO box or whatever, right? If you're not going to be in the country, I always recommend to use your lawyers because it's better than your home address, obviously. But then I recommend you to have a digital certificate. That makes our lives much easier here dealing with the administration.
It's a little bit, so it allows people to act on your behalf online, yes?
It's like a power of attorney. It's like a digital certificate is a power of attorney to deal with the administration. And you could download all the records and you need to grant it to people that you trust and people of your law firm that you trust. We have them in our database and that really helps because it saves time. Otherwise, if you don't want to do it, that's fine, but you need to download everything and do everything. That's the only difference, The time to lodge call is April, May, and June. And for payments are 30th of June, which is 1st of July. First 60% payment is direct debit on the 1st of July. And on the 5th of November is the other 40%.
Right.
Okay. I mean, it's good to do tax planning before, especially if you're selling your property, if you're doing a lot of things that you're going to end up paying taxes. It is important. I try to, when they ring us, I send them a list of things that I need from them for them to have it all well prepared. The more time they save us, the more time they save themselves as well. And less expensive will be the
nobody wants a big tax bill.
Yeah, correct. So that's with regards to income tax return.
Okay. A little bit on wealth tax now then. How wealthy do you have to be to pay tax in Spain, Ignacio?
Right. It will depend first on whether and what community you are a tax resident. Okay. The wealth tax needs to be lodged from April, exactly the same like that renta. 1st of April to the 30th of June, always 1 year back. Okay, you're looking at back. Now, you will need to have the main property doesn't count up to 300,000 euros per person. So you've got an allowance per person,
right,
up to 300,000. Okay. Then you have in this community nowadays 500,000 euros per person. Okay. And after that, then it's taxable. It goes the sliding scale. I think I've got it in the website. It goes from 0 up to 2.5% of your wealth. This got an allowance. So always we talk about the net figure. Okay, if you have mortgages, that counts in your favor. Okay, so the equity is what you have net. So that's per person. And this community, actually the PP advice
in Valencia
said they would remove the wealth tax and make it exempt like Andalusia, Balearic or Madrid. Still didn't happen.
Hasn't happened as yet.
Hasn't happened as yet. Because between all this fight, Carl, between the central government and the local,
regions,
the
communities,
they approved the solidarity tax, and that only applies for those who've got more than 3,700,000 euros, and the tax will apply if there was not a wealth tax in a community. For example, Madrid, it doesn't have a wealth tax, so they will not pay all these, let's call it like an allowance or an exemption, because the community doesn't want that. But the central government says you have to add that and combine it with your income tax return.
Okay.
Now, there is an allowance, so there is a reduction of that wealth tax. The tax could be reduced up to 80% of that, combined by the income tax return.
I see.
Okay, so there is always a rule that can not go over more than 60% of what you paid. It's a quite complex formula, but you need to do in combination. So if you're doing your income tax return with one person, I will recommend you to do the wealth tax, as long as they know how to do it, with the same advisor. Okay, because you need the two figures to use the allowances.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay, and so we need to talk about wealth tax only if applicable in a community, and solidarity tax will only apply for those who do not have the wealth tax approved. So in this region, to be practical, we have wealth tax.
I see.
Okay, so that applies.
Okay, and it's obviously now we're going to talk residents and non-residents, because it'll be different, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The non-resident is about minimum 700,000 euros plus the property. But that's easy to control, Carl, because you know what you're going to bring to the country as a non-tax resident. So you could always do tax planning and say, well, what is a wealth tax here? These amounts, okay. Because it's only tax or whatever is in Spain for non-resident. For residents is worldwide assets.
Of course, yeah.
So that gives you a hint whether, I always say to clients, Carl, just before you relocate into Spain, just hire somebody to do planning, and then you've got the answer. And it's not Bob in the bar telling you about all these things.
Absolutely,
you know?
yeah. There's always someone in the bar who knows, but they're not necessarily correct.
That's true. But we are doing a lot of advice, a lot of video conference for a lot of Americans that they are coming over to Spain. And their system is different, okay? It's completely different. We do a lot of Americans' income tax return. And they're very grateful to know, and they contact us to know exactly about the figure.
And this can be done, obviously, since COVID. Everything's it can be done online. There's no problem at all. So with video conferencing as well. And I think we're going to be talking in a bit more detail about that with Rich Reynolds, our US correspondent, in the coming future, aren't we? It like I said, tax for anybody, even in your own language, is a bit of a minefield. And I think whatever help you can get is welcome. Certainly in Spain, where things can be like, as you said, it's not just different on a national scale, it's different depending on which community or region you live in, and then if you're resident, if you're non-resident, and there are lots of different permutations as always, as there are with taxes. And that's why I always say, just get advice and do your best. Anything that we've been talking about today, you can find online at alicantilawyers.es, and you don't have to look for Pellicer and Heredia. alicantilawyers.es will bring you straight to the website. Plenty about taxes and more on there. Good to talk to you.
Okay, thank you, Carl. See you soon.
Cheers.
Cheers, bye.